She thought the billionaire wanted her for a night, but he gave her a name and a future. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew she shouldn't have looked back, but she did anyway. Rainey Thomas balanced the silver tray against her hip, her movements fluid, despite the exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. The Meridian Grand Hotel's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor, and the soft murmur of Miami's elite filled the air like expensive perfume. 26 years old, with eyes that held too much wisdom for her age, Rainey had perfected the art of being invisible while serving the visible. Tonight was different, though. She could feel it in the way her pulse quickened when she entered the private ballroom on the 42nd floor. "Table 7 needs their champagne refreshed," whispered Marlowe, her fellow server, rushing past with a tray of canapes. "And that man at the corner booth? He's been watching you for the past hour." Rainey's stomach tightened. She'd felt those eyes on her, intense, calculating, yet somehow gentle. She'd trained herself not to engage with the guests beyond professional courtesy. Men in $1,000 suits didn't notice girls like her, unless they wanted something temporary, something forgettable. But when she finally turned toward table 7, her breath caught. Beckett Holden sat alone in the shadows, his dark hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection. She'd seen his photograph in business magazines, the shipping magnate who owned half the luxury cruise lines in the Caribbean. So up close, he was more imposing than any camera could capture, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wasn't looking at his phone like the other guests. He wasn't networking or schmoozing. He was simply watching her. Rainey approached his table with practiced composure, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Good evening, Mr. Holden. Would you care for more champagne?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "You know who I am." The staff briefing mentioned VIP guests. She kept her voice steady, professional. "Your glass appears to be empty." "It's been empty for 20 minutes. His voice was deep, with just a hint of amusement. "I was waiting. Waiting for what? For you to notice." Heat crept up Rainey's neck. She'd dealt with wealthy men before. Most treated service staff like furniture that occasionally moved. But Beckett's attention felt different, dangerous. "I notice everything, sir." "It's part of the job." She reached for his glass, but his fingers brushed hers as he handed it over. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds. It might as well have been lightning. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. Giving her name meant crossing a line she'd drawn years ago. "Rainey. Rainey." He repeated it like he was tasting something rare. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. "I should get your champagne," she said, stepping back. But something in his expression made her pause. "When does your shift end?" The question hung in the air between them. Rainey glanced around the ballroom, noting the other guests, the security cameras, the invisible boundaries that separated her world from his. "Mr. Holden, I appreciate the interest, but I don't mix business with—" "It's not business." His voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. "And I'm not asking for what you think I'm asking for." She studied his face, searching for the lie, the ulterior motive, the trap. All she found was honesty that caught her off guard. "What are you asking for?" "Coffee. Tomorrow morning. Somewhere you feel safe." Rainey's mind raced. She thought of her grandmother's medical bills stacked on her kitchen counter. She thought of the double shift she'd been pulling just to keep their heads above water. She thought of all the men who'd promised her things they never intended to give. But she also thought of the genuine curiosity in his eyes, the way he'd waited 20 minutes for her to simply notice him. "There's a small cafe on Collins Avenue," she heard herself saying. "Sunrise Diner, 8 a.m. I'll be there." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Rainey." "Yes? Thank you." 2 simple words that somehow felt like the most expensive gift she'd ever received. As she walked away, champagne bottle in hand, Rainey felt the weight of his gaze following her across the ballroom. She told herself it was just coffee, just one morning, just one conversation with a man who seemed to see her as more than invisible, but deep in her chest, something whispered that tomorrow morning would change everything, and for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. What would you do if someone like Beckett noticed you? Would you have said yes to that coffee invitation? She almost didn't go, but her heart made the decision before her mind could stop it. Rainey stood outside the Sunrise Diner at 7:58 a.m., her palms damp despite the morning breeze that carried the scent of ocean salt and fresh coffee. She'd changed clothes 3 times, settling on a simple sundress that made her feel like herself rather than trying to impress anyone. Her grandmother had raised her to believe that the right person would appreciate her authenticity, not a performance. Through the diner's windows, she spotted him immediately. Beckett sat in a corner booth, dressed in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt. So different from the suit-clad mogul she'd served the night before. He looked human, approachable, almost nervous. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. Their eyes met across the small restaurant filled with truckers, early commuters, and regulars who'd been coming here for decades. This wasn't his world of crystal chandeliers and champagne. This was hers. "You came," he said, standing as she approached the booth. The gesture surprised her. Men in her world rarely stood when she entered a room. "You sound shocked," she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. "Pleasantly surprised," he corrected. "I wasn't sure if you'd change your mind." The waitress, Dolores, shuffled over with a coffee pot that had seen better years. "Morning, honey," she said to Rainey with a warm smile. "Your usual? Please. And thank you, Dolores." Beckett watched the interaction with interest. "You're a regular here. Since I was 16, Dolores gave me my first job bussing tables when my grandmother got sick." Rainey accepted the steaming mug, inhaling the familiar aroma that meant home. "What about you? Do you have places that feel like home?" Something flickered across his expression. Vulnerability, maybe longing. "I have houses, properties, hotel suites." He paused, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. "But home? No, not in a long time." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She'd expected smooth words, calculated charm. Instead, she found something raw and real. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said, leaning forward slightly. Rainey hesitated. She'd learned not to share personal details with men who might use them against her, but something in Beckett's storm-gray eyes felt safe. "Nana Jolene raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She worked 2 jobs to put me through high school, never once complained when I had to skip college to take care of her when the diabetes got bad." She traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "She taught me that dignity isn't about what you have. It's about how you treat people and how you let them treat you." Smart woman. The smartest. She always says, "Baby girl, never let anyone make you feel small. You take up exactly the space you're supposed to in this world." Beckett smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I'd like to meet her someday." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than they should have been for 2 people sharing coffee on a Wednesday morning. "What about you?" Rainey asked, needing to shift the focus away from the implications of his statement. "What made you build an empire on the water?" His expression grew distant. "My father owned a small fishing boat in Charleston. Every summer, he'd take me out before dawn, and we'd watch the sunrise from the middle of the harbor. He used to say that water didn't lie. It showed you exactly who you were, stripped away all the pretense." He paused. "He died when I was 15. Heart attack on the dock, loading nets for another man's boat. I'm sorry. I swore that day that I'd never work for someone else's dream again, that I'd build something that would last." He looked directly at her. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I wanted it to last, until last night." "What happened last night?" "I watched a woman serve champagne to people who didn't see her, and I realized she was the most real thing in that entire room." His voice was quiet, honest. "You didn't try to impress anyone. You didn't play games. You just existed beautifully." Heat crept up Rainey's neck. "You don't know me, Beckett. Then let me learn." The simple request hit her like a wave. No pressure, no demands, no promises he couldn't keep. Just an invitation to be known. Dolores refilled their cups, and they talked for another hour about books, dreams, the way Miami looked different at sunrise versus sunset. Rainey found herself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in months. When Beckett walked her to the bus stop afterward, he didn't try to kiss her or press for more time. He simply said, "Same time tomorrow? I work the morning shift tomorrow. Then dinner, somewhere you choose." She studied his face, searching for the catch. "Why?" "Because in 38 years I've never met anyone who made me want to understand the difference between existing and living." He stepped closer but didn't touch her. "And I think you might be the person who could teach me." As her bus pulled up, Rainey made a decision that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. Luigi's Pizza on Washington Avenue, 7 o'clock. His smile could have powered the entire city. "I'll be there." She climbed onto the bus and found a window seat, watching him stand on the sidewalk until she disappeared from view. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who looked different than she had yesterday. Softer somehow, more hopeful. But as the bus carried her toward another day of making ends meet, doubt crept in. What did a billionaire really want with a girl from the diner? And more importantly, what did she want with him? He was already there when she arrived. And somehow that changed everything. Rainey pushed open the glass door of Luigi's Pizza, the familiar scent of oregano and melted cheese wrapping around her like a warm hug. The restaurant buzzed with families sharing dinner, teenagers on dates, and long-time couples who still held hands across red checkered tablecloths. It was the kind of place where love felt possible, uncomplicated. Beckett sat in a corner booth, looking completely out of place yet perfectly at ease. His expensive watch caught the overhead light, but he'd rolled up his sleeves and loosened his collar. When he saw her, he stood again, that same gesture that had surprised her that morning. "You're early," she said, approaching the table. "So are you." His smile was warm, genuine. "I was hoping you wouldn't change your mind." "I almost did," she admitted, sliding into the booth across from him. 3 times, actually. "What stopped you?" She considered the question while studying the menu she'd memorized years ago. Curiosity, I think. And maybe hope. Hope for what? That maybe I was wrong about men like you. The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. Beckett leaned back slightly, processing her words without offense. "What do you think you know about men like me? That they take what they want and leave when they're bored." She met his gaze directly. "That they see women like me as temporary entertainment. Women like you, working class, black, without connections or trust funds or the right pedigree." Beckett was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the table. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "My father was a fisherman, Rainey. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house with holes in the roof and more bills than money. The first time I ate at a restaurant like the one you work at, I was 25 and terrified I'd used the wrong fork." He paused. "Money changed my circumstances. It didn't change who I am at my core." Before she could respond, a cheerful voice interrupted them. "Well, well, look who's gracing us with her presence." Rainey turned to see Tony Luigi himself, the 3rd-generation owner whose family had run this place since 1952. His apron was stained with sauce, his smile genuine and wide. "Hey, Mr. Luigi," Rainey said, warmth flooding her voice. "How's Mrs. Luigi feeling?" "Better, thanks to those soup recipes your grandmother sent over. That woman's got healing in her hands." He turned curious eyes to Beckett. "And you brought a friend. Tony Luigi, meet Beckett Halden. Beckett, this is the man who makes the best pizza in Miami." Beckett stood and extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, sir." Tony's handshake was firm, assessing. "Any friend of Rainey's is family here. This girl," he gestured toward her with obvious affection, "helped my grandson with his college essays last year, got him into Florida State on a scholarship." "Tony, stop embarrassing me," Rainey laughed, but Beckett watched the interaction with fascination. "No embarrassment, just truth. You want your usual, sweetheart. And for your friend." They ordered Rainey's usual pepperoni and Tony's recommendation for Beckett, and settled back into their conversation as Tony bustled away. "He loves you," Beckett observed. "I've been coming here since high school. When Nana couldn't afford dinner sometimes, Tony would accidentally make too much food and send me home with leftovers." She picked at her napkin. "There are good people everywhere, if you know where to look. You have a family here. I have a community. It's different when you don't have money. You rely on each other. Look out for each other." She studied his face. "What about you? Do you have people who care about you, not your bank account?" Beckett considered this. "I have business associates, employees, board members." He paused. "But people who care about me? Really care? I'm not sure I've allowed anyone close enough to find out." "That sounds lonely." "It has been until recently." Their pizza arrived and they ate while sharing stories. Beckett told her about learning to sail on his father's boat, about the first cruise ship he'd bought with a loan that terrified him. Rainey shared memories of helping Nana in the kitchen, of dreaming about opening her own restaurant someday. "What would you call it?" Beckett asked. "Jolene's Kitchen, after my grandmother. She always said food tastes better when it's made with love and served with dignity." "That sounds perfect." As the evening wore on, Rainey found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. Beckett asked thoughtful questions, listened without trying to fix or change anything, and made her laugh with dry observations about the absurdity of corporate life. When he walked her to the bus stop again, the Miami night was warm and alive around them. "Thank you for tonight," he said, "for showing me your world. It's not glamorous. It's real, and it's beautiful." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with pizza and possibility. "Rainey?" "Yes." "I know you have every reason not to trust me, but I need you to know, this isn't a game for me. You're not a game for me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Then what am I? I'm still figuring that out, but I know I want to keep trying. The bus arrived, its brakes hissing in the night air. As Rainey climbed the steps, she turned back to find Beckett watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Same time Friday?" he called through the open door. She hesitated, teetering on the edge of something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Your choice this time," she said. "Surprise me." His smile was brilliant in the streetlight. "I will." As the bus pulled away, Rainey pressed her palm against the window, watching him grow smaller in the distance. For the first time in her adult life, she was allowing herself to hope for something more than just survival. But hope, she knew, was the most dangerous emotion of all. She never expected him to remember what she'd said about sunrises, but he did. Friday morning came with a text that made Rainey's breath catch. "Meet me at the marina at 6 a.m. Trust me." Standing on the dock in the pre-dawn darkness, wrapped in her grandmother's old cardigan, Rainey wondered if she'd lost her mind. The marina was a world of gleaming yachts and casual wealth that made her feel small and out of place. She was about to turn around when she spotted him. Beckett emerged from the shadows near a sleek sailboat, his hair tousled by the ocean breeze. He wore jeans and a simple sweater, but somehow managed to look like he belonged both here and nowhere at the same time. "You came," he said, his relief evident. "You said to trust you." She gestured toward the boat. "Please tell me you know how to sail this thing." "Been sailing since I was 12. He extended his hand to help her aboard. "My father taught me, said the ocean was the only honest conversation partner he'd ever found." The boat was smaller than she'd expected, intimate rather than ostentatious. Beckett moved with practiced efficiency, preparing to set sail, as Rainey settled onto a cushioned bench near the bow. "Where are we going?" she asked as they glided away from the dock. "Nowhere special, just away." As Miami's skyline shrank behind them, Rainey felt something loosen in her chest. Out here, there were no class differences, no expectations, no judgments, just water and wind, and the growing light on the horizon. "You mentioned you like sunrises," Beckett said, adjusting the sail. "Figured you might like to see one from out here. You remembered that?" "I remember everything you tell me." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had listened to her, really listened enough to remember the small things? They sailed in comfortable silence as the sky began to lighten. Rainey pulled her cardigan closer, breathing in the salt air and the freedom that came with being surrounded by endless water. "Tell me something," Beckett said, settling beside her as the boat found its rhythm. "What did you dream about when you were little, before life got complicated?" She considered the question, watching pelicans skim the surface of the water. "I wanted to be a teacher. I used to line up my dolls and pretend to teach them about faraway places I'd read about in library books." She smiled at the memory. "What about you?" "I wanted to be my father. Not rich, not famous, just good. He had this way of making everyone feel important, whether they were buying fish or just asking about his day." Beckett's voice grew quiet. "I sometimes wonder what he'd think of who I became." "What do you think he'd think?" "That I built the empire but forgot the kingdom." The honesty hit her like a wave. She turned to study his profile as he watched the horizon, seeing vulnerability he probably showed to very few people. "It's not too late," she said softly, "to remember. Isn't it? I've spent 20 years being someone else, someone harder. But you're here, with me, on your father's kind of boat, watching the sunrise he taught you to love." She reached over and touched his hand briefly. "That sounds like remembering to me." The sun crested the horizon in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the water in shades of gold. Rainey had seen hundreds of sunrises from her apartment window, but this one felt different, magical. "My grandmother always says that every sunrise is God giving us another chance to get it right," she said. "Smart woman. She'd like you. What makes you think that?" Rainey considered this as dolphins appeared off their starboard side, playing in the boat's wake. "Because you listen, really listen, and because you brought me here to see something beautiful without expecting anything in return." They spent the morning sailing, talking about books and music and the way water looked different depending on the depth. Beckett taught her to tie nautical knots, his hands guiding hers with gentle patience. When her stomach growled around 9 o'clock, he produced a basket with fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee in a thermos. "You thought of everything," she marveled. "I wanted it to be perfect." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Because I've never wanted to impress someone for the right reasons before." As they sailed back toward shore, Rainey felt something shift inside her chest. The careful walls she'd built around her heart had developed cracks, and light was starting to seep through. "Beckett? Yeah?" This was perfect, but not because of the boat or the sunrise or even the dolphins. She met his eyes. "It was perfect, because you shared something you love with someone you're getting to know. That's rare." When they docked, he walked her to where her bus would pick her up for her afternoon shift at the hotel. The morning had transformed them both somehow. She could see it in the way he looked at her, feel it in the way her heart refused to settle back into its normal rhythm. "Tomorrow's Saturday," he said as the bus approached. "You free for dinner?" "Where?" "My place. I want to cook for you." The invitation hung between them, loaded with implications that both thrilled and terrified her. His place meant privacy, intimacy, crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Beckett, just dinner, Rainey, I promise. I want to show you who I am when there's no one else around." The bus hissed to a stop behind her. This was the moment of choice: stay safe in the shallows or dive into deeper waters. "What time?" she heard herself ask. His smile was radiant. 7, I'll send a car." As the bus carried her toward another day of serving people who barely saw her, Rainey touched her lips where the salt air still lingered. Tomorrow night, she would enter his world for real. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure who would emerge on the other side. She expected a mansion, but found a home instead. The black sedan pulled through wrought-iron gates and up a winding driveway lined with royal palms. Rainey pressed her face to the window, expecting to see some palatial estate that would make her feel microscopic. Instead, the car stopped in front of a stunning but surprisingly intimate Mediterranean-style villa overlooking Biscayne Bay. Beckett met her at the front door, flour dusting his navy button-down shirt and an expression of endearing nervousness on his face. "You're cooking," she observed, stepping into a foyer that managed to feel both elegant and welcoming. "Attempting to cook," he corrected, leading her through rooms filled with warm woods, soft lighting, and artwork that looked chosen for love rather than investment. "Fair warning, I may have been overly ambitious." The house smelled like garlic and herbs, like someone actually lived here rather than just storing expensive things. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the bay, where the setting sun painted the water in shades of amber and rose. "This is beautiful," Rainey said, meaning it. "It feels like you. What were you expecting? Cold marble, intimidating art, furniture you're afraid to sit on." She touched a soft throw draped over a well-worn leather chair. "Not this. This is what I bought with my first real money, when I could finally afford something that felt like the home I'd always wanted." He gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on, I need a witness to either my triumph or my disaster." The kitchen was the heart of the house, spacious but cozy, with a large island, professional appliances, and herbs growing in pots along the windowsill. Something bubbled on the stove, while bread warmed in the oven. "Smells incredible," Rainey said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "What are we having?" "My father's seafood risotto. He taught me to make it when I was 16. Said it was the dish that won my mother's heart." Beckett stirred the pot with careful attention. "I haven't made it in years." "Why tonight?" He met her eyes across the island. "Because I wanted to share something that mattered, something real." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. She watched him cook, noting the way he moved with surprising grace, the concentration on his face as he added wine to the rice, the small smile that appeared when he tasted the broth. "Can I help?" "Keep me company. Tell me about your day." So she did, sharing stories about the hotel guests, about Nana Jolene's latest pronouncements about modern dating, about the way Miami looked different when you were falling for someone. That last part slipped out before she could stop it. Beckett's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. "Falling!" Heat crept up her neck. "I didn't mean, I just... Rainey." He set down the spoon and moved around the island until he stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his storm-gray eyes. "I need you to know something." "What?" "I've been falling since the moment you refused to tell me your name." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Rainey's heart hammered against her ribs as Beckett reached up to touch her cheek with fingers that smelled like wine and possibility. "This scares me," she whispered. "Me too. What if I'm not enough for your world? What if my world isn't enough for you?" The timer chose that moment to chime, breaking the spell. Beckett stepped back with visible effort, returning to the stove, while Rainey tried to remember how to breathe normally. They ate at a small table on the terrace, the bay spreading out before them like liquid silver. The risotto was perfect, creamy and rich, with chunks of lobster and shrimp that melted on her tongue. More importantly, it tasted like love, like someone had stirred memories and hope into every grain of rice. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. You think so? I know so. This isn't just dinner, Beckett. It's a story. His story. Your story. Becoming our story. After dinner, he showed her the rest of the house. His study, lined with maritime books and model ships. The guest room where he'd put his father's fishing nets in a shadow box. The master bedroom with its view of the water and the simple elegance that spoke of a man who'd found peace. They ended up on the rooftop terrace, sharing a bottle of wine under a canopy of stars. Miami twinkled in the distance, but out here, wrapped in the bay breeze and the warmth of wine, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Tell me what you're thinking, Beckett said, settling beside her on the outdoor sofa. That this feels like a dream. That I keep waiting to wake up and find out none of this is real. It's real. He turned to face her fully. You're real. This is real. When he kissed her, it was soft and tentative, a question rather than a demand. Rainey answered by threading her fingers through his hair, by pressing closer until she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads touching in the starlight. Stay, he whispered against her lips. The word hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility and the kind of choice that changes everything. Beckett, not because I expect anything, just stay. Let me hold you. Let me prove that you're safe with me. She studied his face in the moonlight, seeing sincerity and desire, and something deeper that made her chest ache with its intensity. Okay, she whispered. Later, as she lay in his arms in the guest room he'd insisted she take, listening to the gentle sound of waves against the seawall, Rainey felt something shift permanently inside her heart. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was living, and it was beautiful and terrifying and absolutely worth the risk. She woke up in paradise and remembered she still lived in the real world. Sunday morning light filtered through silk curtains as Rainey opened her eyes in Beckett's guest room. For a moment, she let herself pretend this was her life, waking up in a house that overlooked the bay, wearing one of his soft cotton t-shirts, with the promise of coffee and conversation waiting downstairs. Then her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor. Hospital called. Your grandmother's asking for you. The dream shattered. Rainey was dressed and moving toward the door when Beckett appeared in the hallway, hair tousled from sleep, concern creasing his features. What's wrong? I have to go. My grandmother... She couldn't finish the sentence, fear lodging in her throat like a stone. I'll drive you. No, I'll take the bus. Rainey. His voice was gentle but firm. Let me help. The ride to Jackson Memorial Hospital passed in a blur of Sunday morning traffic and mounting anxiety. Beckett drove with quiet efficiency, his hand finding hers whenever they stopped at red lights. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer empty reassurances. He just stayed present, solid, real. At the hospital, Rainey rushed through sterile corridors that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. She found Nana Jolene in bed, looking smaller and more fragile than Rainey had ever seen her, but with eyes still bright with spirit. There's my baby girl, Nana said, her voice hoarse but warm. You look different, glowing. Don't change the subject. What happened? Blood sugar got away from me again. Nothing dramatic. Nana's eyes shifted to the doorway where Beckett stood uncertainly. You gonna introduce me to this handsome man? Or do I have to guess? Rainey felt her worlds colliding in a way that made her chest tight. Nana, this is Beckett. Beckett, my grandmother, Jolene Thomas. Beckett stepped forward with the same respectful attention he'd shown Tony Luigi. Mrs. Thomas. Rainey's told me so much about you. Has she now? Nana's eyes sparkled with mischief despite her pale complexion. And what exactly has she said? That you're the wisest woman in Miami, that you taught her dignity isn't about what you have, but how you treat people. Beckett pulled up a chair beside the bed, that you make soup that can heal more than just illness. Nana studied him with the penetrating gaze that had seen through every boy Rainey had ever brought around. You got good manners, that's a start. What do you do for work? I run a shipping company. Must be a big company if you can take off Sunday morning to sit in a hospital with an old woman you just met. Beckett's smile was genuine. The most important things in life don't happen on a schedule, ma'am. While the doctor examined Nana, Rainey and Beckett sat in the family waiting area, among other worried faces and whispered conversations. The contrast between this morning and the night before felt jarring. The elegant dinner, the wine under the stars, seemed like something that had happened to someone else. This is my life, Rainey said quietly, gesturing around the waiting room. Hospital visits, medication schedules, counting every dollar to make sure the rent gets paid. It's not sailboats and wine tastings. I know. Do you? Because last night was beautiful. But this morning, this is reality. Beckett turned in his chair to face her fully. Rainey, my father died in a hospital that smelled exactly like this one. I sat in a waiting room just like this, wearing the same clothes I'd worn to school, praying for a miracle that didn't come. His voice was soft but steady. Elegance is nice, but this is love. This is what matters. Before she could respond, the doctor appeared with Nana's discharge papers and a lecture about medication compliance. As they prepared to leave, Nana pulled Beckett aside while Rainey gathered her things. You care about my granddaughter, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am, very much. She's been hurt before. Men who saw her beauty but not her worth, who wanted to play house until something shinier came along. I'm not going anywhere, Mrs. Thomas. Nana's expression softened. I believe you mean that, but meaning it and doing it are different things. My Rainey's got a heart big enough to hold the whole world, but it's been broken enough times that she's careful about who gets to touch it. I understand. Do you? Because loving my granddaughter means loving all of this. She gestured around the hospital room. The worry, the struggle, the way we take care of each other when things get hard. It means showing up not just for the pretty moments, but for the scared ones too. I want to show up for all of it. During the ride back to Nana's apartment in Little Haiti, Beckett listened as 3 generations of neighbors stopped by to check on Jolene. Mrs. Rodriguez brought homemade flan. Young Marcus from downstairs helped carry groceries. Teenage Solange offered to run errands. Rainey watched Beckett take it all in. The cramped apartment with its mismatched furniture and family photos. The easy intimacy of people who'd chosen to be family. The way love showed up in casseroles and phone calls, and someone always being available when you needed them. This is beautiful, he said as they prepared to leave. It's not much. It's everything. He took her hand as they walked to his car. It's community. It's love without conditions. It's what I've been missing my entire life. That evening, as Beckett dropped her off at her own small apartment, Rainey felt the weight of possibility and fear in equal measure. Thank you, she said, for today, for understanding. Thank you for letting me be part of it. He cupped her face in his hands. This doesn't scare me, Rainey. Your life, your family, your world, none of it scares me. You know what scares me? What? The thought that you might not believe I mean it. As she watched him drive away, Rainey pressed her fingers to her lips where he'd kissed her goodbye. Today had been a test neither of them had planned, and somehow, impossibly, they'd both passed. But as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that bigger tests were still coming, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what they might reveal. She thought she'd left her past behind, until it walked into the hotel lobby wearing a $1,000 suit. Tuesday evening at the Meridian Grand was typically quiet, the kind of shift where Rainey could almost pretend her life was settling into something resembling happiness. She'd been floating through her days since Sunday, replaying the way Beckett had held her grandmother's hand, the way he'd listened to Mrs. Rodriguez's stories about her late husband, the way he'd fit so naturally into her world. Then she saw him. Darius Wellington stood near the concierge desk, his dark skin gleaming under the crystal chandeliers, his designer suit tailored to perfection. He was still devastatingly handsome, still carried himself with the arrogant confidence that had once made her 22-year-old heart race. But now, 4 years later, all she felt was the sick twist of old wounds reopening. He spotted her before she could disappear into the service corridor. Rainey? His voice carried across the marble lobby, that same honey-smooth tone that had whispered promises he'd never intended to keep. Rainey Thomas? She had no choice but to approach, her professional smile locked in place like armor. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Meridian Grand. How may I assist you? Darius's laugh was rich and familiar, and made her skin crawl. Sir? Baby. It's me, Darius. I'm working, Mr. Wellington. If you need assistance with hotel services, I need assistance understanding why the woman I was going to marry is serving drinks instead of planning our wedding. The words hit like a slap. Several guests turned to stare, and Rainey felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. If you'll excuse me, I have other guests to attend to. But Darius caught her wrist as she turned away, his grip just tight enough to be possessive. We need to talk. No, we don't. 5 minutes, please. Against her better judgment, Rainey led him to a quiet corner near the terrace doors. The Miami skyline glittered beyond the glass, but all she could see was the memory of another night, 4 years ago, when this same man had promised her everything and delivered nothing but heartbreak. You look good, Darius said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her feel exposed, different, more polished. "What do you want, Darius?" "I want to explain. What happened between us—" "What happened," Rainey interrupted, "is that you decided a congressional campaign needed a different kind of wife. Someone with the right connections, the right pedigree, the right skin tone to appeal to certain voters." Pain flickered across his features. "That's not fair." "Fair?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "You proposed to me on a Tuesday and married someone else 6 months later. You think fair has anything to do with this conversation? I was young, ambitious, I made choices I regret every day. And now? Now I'm divorced. Now I realize what I lost." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with desperation. "We could try again, Rainey. I'm different now. So am I." Something in her tone must have warned him, because his expression shifted, became calculating. "You're seeing someone." It wasn't a question, and Rainey saw no point in denying it. "Yes. Anyone I know?" Before she could answer, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. "There you are." Beckett approached with easy confidence, his hand settling protectively on the small of Rainey's back. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a white button-down, but somehow managed to make Darius's expensive suit look like costume jewelry. "I was starting to worry," Beckett said, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "Ready for dinner?" Rainey felt the solid warmth of him behind her, steadying her when everything else felt like quicksand. "Beckett, this is Darius Wellington." "Darius." "Beckett Holden." She watched recognition dawn in Darius's eyes. Everyone in Miami knew the Holden name, the shipping empire, the quiet power that came with real wealth. "Holden," Darius said, extending his hand with practiced politician's charm. "Pleasure to meet you." Beckett's handshake was brief, polite, final. "Likewise, though I believe Rainey was just finishing her shift." "Actually, we were having a conversation," Darius said, his smile sharp around the edges. "About old times." "Old times have a way of staying old," Beckett replied smoothly. "Don't they, darling?" The endearment rolled off his tongue with casual possession that made Rainey's heart skip. She'd never heard him call her that before, but it felt natural, right? Like a claim she wanted him to make. "They do," she agreed, stepping closer to Beckett's warmth. Darius was just leaving, but Darius wasn't ready to concede defeat. "Rainey, we have history, real history. Don't throw that away for some rich boy's fantasy." The insult hit its mark. Beckett's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Rainey saw the steel beneath his gentle exterior. "The only fantasy here," Beckett said, his voice deadly quiet, "is thinking you have any claim on a woman who's made her choice crystal clear. Has she? Because the Rainey I knew wouldn't be impressed by money and pretty boats." "You're right," Rainey said, finding her voice and her spine in the same moment. "The Rainey you knew was young enough to believe that love meant accepting whatever crumbs someone was willing to offer. But I'm not that woman anymore." She turned to face Darius fully, letting him see the strength that years of struggle and growth had built inside her. "I don't want your regrets or your second chances. I don't want the man you've become, or the apology you think you owe me. I want the life I'm building with someone who chose me first, not as a consolation prize." Darius's composure finally cracked. "You think he's different? You think rich men don't get bored? Don't trade up when something better comes along?" "I think," Beckett said, his arm tightening protectively around Rainey, "that you've confused your character with mine." After Darius left, his parting glare promising this wasn't over, Rainey and Beckett stood in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation. The hotel lobby had returned to its usual elegant hum, but Rainey felt like she'd been turned inside out. "You okay?" Beckett asked softly. "I don't know." She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to process what had just happened. "I thought I was over all that. Over him. You are. I could see it in your face. You weren't looking at him like an ex-lover. You were looking at him like a mistake you'd learned from." They walked to his car in silence, but as they drove through the Miami night, Rainey felt the weight of unfinished business settling on her shoulders. "He'll be back," she said quietly. "I know. This won't be simple anymore." Beckett reached across the console and took her hand. "Rainey, look at me." She turned to meet his storm-gray eyes, seeing determination and something deeper that made her chest ache. "I don't care if it's simple. I care that it's real, and what we have, that's the most real thing I've ever felt." As they pulled up to her apartment, Rainey realized that for the first time since walking away from Darius 4 years ago, she wasn't running from her past. She was running toward her future, even if that future was about to get a lot more complicated. She thought she knew what love looked like, until he redefined it completely. Thursday evening found Rainey on Beckett's terrace, trying to focus on the book in her lap while her mind raced with thoughts of Darius's reappearance. 2 days had passed since the confrontation at the hotel, and she'd been jumping at shadows, expecting him to materialize around every corner. Beckett emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of tea, his expression thoughtful as he settled beside her on the outdoor sofa. "You've read the same page 4 times, he observed gently. "Have I?" She closed the book with a sigh. "I can't stop thinking about what he said, about you getting bored, trading up. Do you believe him?" "No." "Yes. Maybe." She set down her tea and turned to face him. "I know you're not him, Beckett, but he's not entirely wrong about the pattern. Rich men, poor women. It rarely ends well for the women." Beckett was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her palm. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "What if I told you I had a way to prove that's not what this is?" Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he stood and walked to the edge of the terrace, his hands braced against the railing as he stared out at the bay. The setting sun painted him in shades of gold and shadow, and Rainey felt her heart clench with love and fear in equal measure. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," he said without turning around. "About us, about the future, about what I want my life to look like." He faced her then, his storm-gray eyes intense. "And I realized something." "What?" "I don't want to date you, Rainey." The words hit like ice water. She felt her face go pale, her chest constrict with the familiar ache of abandonment. Of course this was too good to be true. "I see," she managed, starting to stand. "I want to marry you." The world tilted on its axis. Rainey sank back onto the sofa, staring at him in shock. "What?" Beckett moved to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I want to marry you. Not because I'm trying to prove a point to your ex, not because I'm caught up in some romantic fantasy, because in the 3 weeks I've known you, you've taught me the difference between existing and living. Beckett, we barely know each other, don't we?" His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I know you take your coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. I know you sing old Motown songs when you're nervous. I know you'd give up your last dollar to help someone you love, and that you cry during commercials with dogs in them." Despite her shock, she smiled. "Those are details. Details matter. But you're right. I don't know if you prefer morning showers or evening baths. I don't know how you like your eggs or what side of the bed you sleep on." His voice grew softer. "But I know the important things. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you realize. I know you make me want to be the man my father raised me to be. I know that when I imagine my future, you're in every single picture." Tears pricked her eyes. "This is crazy. Is it? Or is it the sanest thing either of us has ever done?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it gently on the coffee table between them. "I'm not asking you to marry me next week. I'm asking you to choose a future with me. To let me prove that what Darius said was wrong, that what we have isn't temporary or conditional." Rainey stared at the box, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't understand. What are you proposing exactly?" "I'm proposing we build something together, something real and lasting and completely ours." He opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away, not because of its size or cost, but because of its simple, timeless elegance. A solitaire diamond set in white gold, classic and beautiful and somehow perfectly her. "Beckett, there's more." He closed the box and met her eyes. "I want to give you something else. Something that belongs to you, no matter what happens between us." From his other pocket he pulled out a legal document. Rainey's hands shook as she unfolded it, reading words that made no sense. "A restaurant? The space downtown that you mentioned loving. The one with the big windows and the view of the harbor." His voice was steady, certain. "It's yours, Rainey. Whether you marry me or not, whether you say yes tonight or no tonight, it's yours. The deed is already in your name." She stared at the papers, then at him, then back at the papers. Why would you?" "Because you deserve to choose who you want to be, without worrying about paying rent or medical bills, or whether you can afford to take a risk." He cupped her face in his hands. "I don't want you to say yes because you need me. I want you to say yes because you want me." The tears came then, hot and overwhelming. "You can't just give me a restaurant." "I can. And I did. Jolene's Kitchen, right? That's what you'd call it? You remembered that too." "I remember everything about you." He brushed away her tears with gentle thumbs. "The question is, what do you remember about me? About us, about the way you felt when you woke up in my house and it felt like home? Rainey looked down at the ring, at the deed, at the evidence of a love so profound it left her breathless. This wasn't the desperate grab of a man trying to buy her affections. This was something else entirely, a gift of freedom, of choice, of a future built on solid ground. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what? Of wanting this too much. Of believing in it and having it disappear. Then don't believe in it," he said simply. "Believe in me. Believe in the way I look at you, the way you feel when we're together, the way your grandmother smiled when she saw us together." She thought about Nana Jolene, about the way her eyes had sparkled when she'd watched Beckett help her to the car, about the way Tony Luigi had beamed when Beckett had asked for the recipe for his famous marinara sauce, about the community that had embraced him, not because of his money, but because he'd treated them with respect and genuine interest. "This is insane," she said, "completely. We've known each other 3 weeks. Best 3 weeks of my life. People are going to think I'm a gold digger. Let them think what they want. We'll know the truth." She picked up the ring box, opening it again to study the diamond that caught the last rays of sunlight and threw them back in tiny rainbows. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "what changes?" "Everything and nothing. We take our time planning a future together. We learn each other's morning routines and favorite movies and all the tiny things that make a life shared." He smiled. "And you never have to worry about choosing between love and survival again." Rainey closed her eyes, feeling the weight of possibility and terror and hope all swirling together in her chest. When she opened them, Beckett was watching her with an expression of such tender patience that it nearly broke her heart. "Ask me," she whispered. His smile was radiant. "Rainey Thomas, will you marry me?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her, which, she realized, it probably had been. As Beckett pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that tasted like promises and forever, Rainey felt something shift permanently in her heart. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just dreaming about a future. She was claiming one. She thought the hard part was saying yes, until she discovered what saying yes really meant. The engagement ring caught the morning light as Rainey poured coffee in her small apartment kitchen, still surreal on her finger after 5 days. She'd barely had time to process the magnitude of what had happened, the proposal, the restaurant, the future that suddenly stretched before her like an open road, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that answered was not. "Congratulations," Darius said, his tone deceptively casual. "I hear you're engaged." Rainey's hand tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" "I have resources, and I have concerns." "About what?" "About my friend making a very expensive mistake." The words sent ice through her veins. "What friend? Beckett didn't tell you?" "We go way back. Harvard Business School, class of 2008. Study partners, roommates, best man at each other's first weddings." Darius's laugh was cold, though I suppose he conveniently forgot to mention that part. The kitchen seemed to tilt around her. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask him about the Kappa Alpha house. Ask him about spring break in Cabo 2007. Ask him about the bet we made about who could land the prettiest scholarship girl before graduation." Each word hit like a physical blow. Rainey sank into a chair, her engagement ring suddenly feeling like a weight around her finger. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I care about you. Because I know what it's like to be young and ambitious and willing to do anything to win." His voice softened with false concern. "He's playing a game, Rainey. The same game we both played in college. The difference is I grew up. I learned to love for real. And he didn't? Ask yourself this. What are the odds that a billionaire falls for a hotel waitress in 3 weeks? What are the odds that he just happens to propose with a restaurant deed the day after running into his old college buddy, who once broke that same waitress's heart? The questions hung in the air like poison. Rainey's mind raced, looking for explanations, for ways to make the timeline make sense. But doubt had already taken root, spreading through her chest like ice. "Even if that were true," she said quietly, "why would you care?" "Because I love you. Because I never stopped loving you. And because watching him toy with you the way we used to toy with girls in college, it makes me sick." After Darius hung up, Rainey sat in her kitchen for a long time, staring at the ring that had felt like a promise just hours before. She thought about the timeline, how quickly everything had moved, how perfectly Beckett had appeared in her life, how he'd known exactly what to say and do to make her believe in fairy tales again. She thought about Harvard Business School, about spring break in Cabo, about bets and games and the way rich boys entertained themselves with other people's hearts. By the time Beckett arrived that evening for their dinner plans, Rainey had worked herself into a state of quiet devastation. She met him at the door with red-rimmed eyes and the ring in her palm. "We need to talk," she said. The smile died on his face. "What's wrong? Tell me about Harvard." He went very still. "What about Harvard? Tell me about Darius Wellington. Tell me about the Kappa Alpha house and spring break in Cabo and the bets you used to make about scholarship girls." The color drained from Beckett's face. For a moment, he looked like a man watching his world crumble, and Rainey felt her heart shatter even as part of her had hoped he'd laugh, deny everything, make it all make sense. "Rainey, let me explain. So it's true." The words came out like a whisper. "You knew him. You knew about us." "Yes, but not the way you think." "What way am I supposed to think?" She held up the ring, her hand shaking. "Was this a game? Was I some kind of challenge between old college friends?" "No." His voice was fierce, desperate. "God, no, Rainey, please, let me tell you what really happened." But she was already backing away from him, the ring burning in her palm like evidence of her own stupidity. "I knew," she said, more to herself than to him. "Deep down, I knew this was too good to be true. Men like you don't fall for women like me in 3 weeks. Not for real." "Men like me?" His eyes flashed with something that might have been hurt if she hadn't known better. "What does that mean? Rich? Privileged? Used to getting whatever you want and discarding it when you're bored? Is that really what you think of me?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Tears burned her eyes. "Tell me about the bet, Beckett. Tell me about the game you and Darius played in college." Beckett ran his hands through his hair, looking older than she'd ever seen him. "We were kids. Stupid, entitled kids who thought the world existed for our entertainment. We did things, said things, made bets about things that should have been sacred. About women, about grades, about who could get the best internship or the prettiest date or the most scholarship kids to come to our parties." His voice was raw with self-loathing. "We were assholes, Rainey. Rich, spoiled assholes who thought other people's feelings were fair game. And now? Now I would trade every dollar I have to take it back, to be the man I should have been then, instead of the boy I was." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe the pain in his voice was real, that the way he'd held her grandmother's hand hadn't been part of some elaborate performance. "When did you know?" she asked. "When did you realize who I was?" "The first night. When you told me your name, I remembered Darius talking about a girl named Rainey Thomas. But I swear to you, that's not why I asked you to coffee. That's not why I fell in love with you." "Then why?" "Because you looked at me like I was just a man, not a bank account or a connection or a stepping stone to something better. Just a man." He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "Because you made me remember who I used to be before the money and the power and the walls I built to keep people out. But you didn't tell me. For 3 weeks, you let me fall in love with you without telling me the truth. I was afraid, terrified that if you knew about my connection to Darius, you'd never give me a chance to prove I was different. So you lied. I omitted. I hoped, I prayed that by the time you found out, you'd know me well enough to see the truth." Rainey looked down at the ring in her palm, this symbol of promises she no longer knew if she could trust. "What is the truth, Beckett?" "The truth is that I was a different person in college. The truth is that I knew Darius, that we were friends, that we did terrible things I'm ashamed of." He moved closer, his voice breaking. "But the truth is also that I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life, that the restaurant isn't a game piece, it's my heart, literally signed over to you, that every word I've said, every promise I've made, comes from the man I am now, not the boy I was then." She wanted to believe him. Everything in her heart screamed that this was real, that the love in his eyes couldn't be faked, that the man who'd sat with her grandmother and learned to make his father's risotto couldn't be the same person who'd bet on broken hearts in college. But doubt was a poison that, once introduced, infected everything. "I need time," she whispered, setting the ring on the coffee table between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. "I need to think. Rainey, please, I need you to go." The words hung in the air between them, final and devastating. Beckett looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face like a man saying goodbye to everything he'd ever wanted. "I love you," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, whatever you believe about me, that will never change." After he left, Rainey sank onto her couch and stared at the ring that caught the lamplight and threw it back in fractured pieces. Outside her window, Miami hummed with life and possibility, but inside her apartment the silence felt like the end of the world. She thought about fairy tales and the women who believed in them, and she wondered if love was always this much like drowning. She thought the truth would destroy everything, until she discovered whose truth she'd been believing. 3 days. 3 days of staring at the restaurant deed that bore her name. 3 days of replaying every conversation with Beckett, searching for lies she was no longer sure existed. 3 days of Nana Jolene watching her with knowing eyes and saying nothing, which somehow made everything worse. The knock on her apartment door came at sunset, when Miami's sky was painted in shades of heartbreak and hope. Rainey expected to find Beckett, prepared for another round of explanations and pleas. Instead, she found Marcus, the teenage neighbor from downstairs, holding an envelope with shaking hands. "Miss Rainey, this man, he gave me $50 to bring this to you. Said it was important." The envelope was thick, expensive paper, with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, she found photographs that made her blood turn to ice, pictures of Darius with a young woman who couldn't have been older than 19. Pictures of them together at what looked like campaign events, charity galas, intimate dinners. Pictures that were dated during the time he'd been engaged to Rainey 4 years ago. Beneath the photographs was a note in the same unfamiliar handwriting. "Ms. Thomas, Mr. Wellington hired me to dig up dirt on your fiancé. Instead, I found this. Thought you should know what kind of man has been poisoning your ear about the past." A concerned observer, Rainey's hands shook as she spread the photographs across her coffee table. The dates were clear, damning. While Darius had been promising her forever, he'd been building a future with someone else. While he'd been telling her she wasn't the right fit for his political aspirations, he'd been grooming her replacement. The final photograph was the most devastating. Darius and the young woman at what was clearly an engagement party, her hand displaying a ring that looked suspiciously like the one he'd once given Rainey. Her phone rang, Beckett's name on the screen. "Don't hang up," he said before she could speak. "Please. I know you're angry. I know you don't trust me. But Darius is dangerous. He's been spreading lies about—" "I know," she interrupted. Silence. Then carefully, "You know what? I know about the girl, the one he was with while we were engaged. I know he's been lying." "How?" "Someone sent me photographs." She stared at the evidence of Darius's deception scattered across her table. "Beckett, if he lied about this, what else has he been lying about?" "Everything." His voice was raw with relief and urgency. "Rainey, I need to tell you something. About Harvard. About the bets we made. Darius has been twisting the truth." "What do you mean?" "Can I come over? This isn't a conversation for the phone." 30 minutes later, Beckett sat across from her in her living room, the photographs spread between them like evidence in a trial. He looked older, worn down by 3 days of believing he'd lost everything that mattered. "The bets," he began, his voice steady but pained. "They happened, but not the way Darius told you." "Then how?" "We had a friend, Jeremy Chen, brilliant guy, scholarship student from a working-class family. He was in love with this girl, Sarah, who came from money. She was using him, stringing him along while dating other guys behind his back." Beckett's hands clenched in his lap. Darius thought it was hilarious, made bets about how long Jeremy would keep chasing her, how much money he'd spend trying to impress her. Rainey felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And you?" "I tried to warn Jeremy, tried to get him to see what she was doing, but he wouldn't listen." Beckett met her eyes. "So I made a counter-bet with Darius. Bet him that I could prove Sarah was using Jeremy by getting her to go out with me instead." "Did you?" "I took her to dinner once. She spent the entire evening talking about Jeremy's friends, asking which ones had money, which ones had connections. When I told Jeremy what she'd said, he finally saw the truth." Beckett's voice grew quiet. "The bet was never about conquering women, Rainey. It was about protecting a friend." The pieces clicked into place like a puzzle Rainey hadn't known she was solving. "And Darius? Lost $100 and his entertainment. He never forgave me for ruining his fun, as he called it. Said I was too soft, too sentimental." Beckett leaned forward. "When I started my business, when I began making real money, he tried to reconnect. Wanted to be partners, wanted access to my network. I refused. Because of Jeremy? Because by then I understood what kind of man he really was. The kind who sees other people as chess pieces, who thinks love is a game to be won or lost." Rainey stared at the photographs, seeing them with new eyes. "He's been planning this, hasn't he? Since he saw us together at the hotel." "I think so. I think he saw an opportunity to hurt both of us. You for rejecting his second chance. Me for rejecting his friendship all those years ago." "The timeline," she said suddenly. "He called me the day after your proposal. How did he know we were engaged so quickly?" Beckett's expression darkened. He's been watching us, following us. The private investigator who sent you those photos. I hired him to look into Darius's activities. He's been having us followed for weeks. The violation of it made Rainey feel sick. Why didn't you tell me? Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to handle it myself. Protect you from having to deal with him again. He reached across the space between them, stopping just short of touching her hand. I should have told you everything from the beginning. About knowing him, about our history, about my fears that he'd try to destroy what we had. I was a coward. You were protecting me. I was protecting myself. I was terrified that if you knew the whole truth, you'd see me the way he wanted you to see me, as just another rich boy playing games with people's hearts. Rainey looked at the ring sitting on her coffee table, catching the lamplight like a promise waiting to be claimed. What if I had believed him completely? What if I'd walked away and never looked back? Then I would have spent the rest of my life knowing I'd lost the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too afraid to trust you with the truth. The honesty in his voice broke something open in her chest. She thought about the past 3 days, about the way doubt had poisoned every memory, every moment of happiness they'd shared. She thought about Darius's manipulation, his calculated cruelty, his willingness to destroy two people's chance at love for the sake of his own twisted satisfaction. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For not trusting you, for believing him over what I knew in my heart to be true. You had every reason to doubt. I gave you reasons by not being completely honest. She picked up the ring, feeling its familiar weight in her palm. Beckett? Yeah? Ask me again. His eyes widened with hope and disbelief. Are you sure? I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure that what we have is real, not because it's perfect, but because it's tested and true. She smiled through her tears. I'm sure that I want to build a life with the man who protected his friend from heartbreak, who visits grandmothers in hospitals, who gives restaurant deeds without conditions. Beckett slid from the couch to his knees in front of her, taking the ring with hands that shook slightly. Rainey Thomas, will you marry me? Will you trust me with your heart, your dreams, your grandmother's soup recipes, and all the mornings we have left to share? Yes, she breathed. Yes to all of it. As he slipped the ring back onto her finger, Rainey felt something settle permanently in her chest. Not just love, but certainty. They'd been tested by lies and old wounds, and the malice of someone who couldn't bear to see others find what he'd lost, and they'd chosen each other anyway. Outside her window, Miami glittered with possibility, and for the first time in her life, Rainey wasn't afraid to reach for it, because love, she'd learned, wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about finding someone brave enough to weather them with you. 1 year later, she still came here every morning, but now she was coming home. Rainey stood in the doorway of Jolene's kitchen, watching the early morning sun stream through the large windows that overlooked Miami Harbor. The restaurant was exactly as she'd dreamed it would be. Warm woods, mismatched vintage chairs that invited lingering, the kind of lighting that made everyone look beautiful and feel welcome. The scent of fresh bread and brewing coffee filled the air, along with something more precious. The sound of laughter, conversation, community. You're doing it again, Beckett said softly, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee, hers with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, his black as midnight. Doing what? Standing in doorways looking like you can't believe this is real. She accepted the coffee with a smile that had become as natural as breathing. Sometimes I can't. A year ago, I was serving other people's dreams. Now you're living your own. Through the windows, she could see the small wedding party gathering on the harbor pier. Nothing elaborate, just the people who mattered most. Nana Jolene sat in a place of honor, her wheelchair decorated with white roses, her eyes bright with joy despite the oxygen tank that had become her constant companion. Tony Luigi bustled around with Mrs. Rodriguez, both of them treating the wedding prep like a beloved family celebration. Marcus, now a high school senior, thanks to the college fund Beckett had quietly established, adjusted his new tie with teenage awkwardness and pride. 5 minutes, Mrs. Almost Holden, called Marlowe, Rainey's former hotel colleague turned restaurant manager, poking her head through the kitchen doors. The minister's ready, and your grandmother is starting to make threats about what she'll do if you keep everyone waiting. Rainey laughed, the sound mixing with the gentle chaos of a life fully lived. Tell her we're coming. But she didn't move immediately. Instead, she stood in the space between her old life and her new one, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. The restaurant had opened 6 months ago to lines around the block and reviews that praised not just the food, but the soul of the place. They'd hired staff from the community, single mothers, college students, people who understood that a job could be more than just a paycheck, when it came with dignity and hope. Beckett had been true to his word in ways that still took her breath away. The restaurant was entirely hers, legally and financially, though they'd become partners in every way that mattered. He'd moved his home office to the apartment above the kitchen, claiming he worked better with the sounds of life and love drifting up through the floorboards. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question he'd posed every morning for the past year. "Just one," she said, turning to face him in his simple navy suit that somehow made him more handsome than any tuxedo could have. His face flickered with concern. "What?" "That it took me 27 years to find you." His smile was radiant, the same expression she'd fallen in love with over coffee and conversation at the Sunrise Diner. "Ready to become my wife?" "I've been ready since the morning you remembered I liked sunrises." They walked hand in hand toward their future, past the kitchen where Nana Jolene's recipes had found new life, past the wall of photographs that told the story of every person who'd made this place possible, past the small corner table where they'd shared their first meal as an engaged couple just days after the truth had set them both free. The ceremony was simple and perfect, vows written in their own words, promises made not just to each other, but to the community that had embraced them both. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss tasted like coffee and possibility, and all the mornings they had left to share. As the small reception moved into full swing, Rainey found herself watching the people she loved most in the world celebrating around her. Tony Luigi teaching Beckett's business associates the proper way to eat pizza. Mrs. Rodriguez dancing with Marcus to music played on an old radio. Marlowe taking pictures with a disposable camera, insisting that the best moments deserved to be captured in real film. "What are you thinking about?" Beckett asked, appearing at her side with a piece of wedding cake that Nana Jolene had insisted on making herself. "About how love multiplies," she said, accepting the fork he offered. "I thought loving you meant choosing between my world and yours. But we didn't choose sides. We built something new together. Something that belongs to both of us. Something that belongs to everyone who finds their way here." As the sun set over Miami Harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and promise, Rainey felt the deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. She thought about the girl who'd served champagne to people who didn't see her, about the woman who'd been afraid to hope for more than survival. That girl was still part of her, would always be part of her. But she'd grown into someone who understood that love wasn't about losing yourself in another person. It was about becoming the fullest version of yourself in their presence. "Mrs. Holden," Beckett said, testing out her new name like he was tasting something sweet. "Mrs. Holden," she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue. "Though I'm keeping Thomas on the restaurant. Wouldn't have it any other way." Later that night, after the last guest had gone home and the last dish had been washed, Rainey and Beckett stood together on the harbor pier where they'd been married. The water lapped gently against the pilings, and Miami sparkled around them like a city made of stars. "I love you," Beckett said, the words as fresh and necessary as they'd been the first time he'd spoken them. "I love you too," she replied. "All of you. The boy who protected his friend, the man who learned to make his father's risotto, the husband who gave me wings instead of a cage. What's next for us?" Rainey smiled, thinking about the adoption papers they'd started filling out, about the plans for a second restaurant location, about the scholarship fund they were establishing for kids like Marcus, who needed someone to believe in their potential. "Everything," she said simply, "everything we can dream and build and become together." As they walked back toward the restaurant that bore her grandmother's name, toward the apartment where they'd wake up tomorrow, and every tomorrow after that, Rainey felt the deep peace that comes from knowing you're loved, not for who you might become, but for who you already are. She'd once thought she was too small for a love this big. Now she knew the truth. Love didn't make you smaller. It made you infinite. What happens when you stop surviving and start truly living? How do you know you've found not just love but home? This story began with a woman who thought she deserved only scraps of affection, and a man who'd forgotten how to feel. It ends with two people who discovered that the best love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about imperfect people choosing to grow together, day after day, sunrise after sunrise. Thank you for joining Rainey and Beckett on their journey from strangers to soulmates. May we all be brave enough to believe in love that chooses us not for what we lack, but for what we bring to the table. Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.